30-something years with a little girl. Yeah, I'm still learning, and mine's about to turn 40. Shoot, my wife is 41, and I don't know what to do with the wife.
Okay, sir, you're live again.
Okay, all right, we're there. Welcome back, those of you who were doing live stream. We hit the wrong button there at some point. Yeah, I know.
Let's do this again. We gotta click. We gotta click onto this.
That's what happened last week. You had to hit the cursor on the computer rather than scrolling.
There you go. Let's go back to. Am I going the right way?
Yeah,
Just tell me when.
keep it going. There we go. Get that. Right there.
Okay.
All right. We're doing the book of Numbers tonight. Okay. So
What happened to Leviticus?
we did Leviticus last
No,
week.
you told us to read Leviticus for this week. But you didn't tell us about Leviticus.
Yeah, because I went over the Day of Atonement.
Yes, you did.
That's all in Leviticus 16. So, yeah, I just did it quickly. It was learning how to worship God was the key phrase. All right, so now we come into the book of Numbers. And, boy, that's a strange name for a book of the Bible, isn't it? Have you ever really thought about that? I mean, we grow up reading it in the Bible, so we know there's a book in the Bible named Numbers. But why in the world is there a book called Numbers in the Bible? Well, that's a good question, and we're going to discover that tonight. So you follow along in your book with Numbers. The key ing word for the book of Numbers, and you want to remember this because this really does encapsulate what that book is about, is wandering. And this is my clue to everybody. You know, when I try to remind you, I just call it they were wandering in the wilderness, okay? So what's the key ing word to Numbers? Wandering. One more time. Wandering. And the phrase is wandering in the wilderness. Okay. So when we left Moses and the Israelites at Mount Sinai. He'd gone up on Mount Sinai, and God was teaching them how to worship him. That's what the book of Leviticus was about. They were learning how to worship him. They learned how to do the feast. They learned how to do the sacrifices. They learned about the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16 that we talked so much about last week. And so they were learning all that. Then they stay there as they are building the tabernacle. And I did show you the tabernacle that was in the wilderness. And we took a look at the tabernacle. And I'll show it to you again. This is the side of the tabernacle. And they put the tent around the edge of it. And then inside there, you saw the outer courtyard in this area here. And then the average Jew, Hebrew could come in here and worship, and they would bring their sacrifice in, and it would be put upon the brazen altar, which is where this would be the brazen altar, where the priests would take their animal and sacrifice it on the brazen altar. And this would be like the uniform of the high priest, prescribed by the Lord. And see, he had the breastplate. You read in the New Testament about the breastplate of righteousness. This is sort of the backdrop of what that is talking about. So you see in his breastplate, he has these 12 stones here. And they're obviously representing the 12 what? Tribes of the nation of Israel, okay? All right, and we went over the Day of Atonement, and they carried the goat out to the woods, into the wilderness, the one for Azel, remember? That means the scapegoat, that they took them out into the wilderness. Now, so they're going to leave Mount Sinai, and they start making their way up from Mount Sinai. If I were to draw a map, now I tell y'all I'm good at a lot of things, but map drawing is not one of them, okay? All right, so this would be the Mediterranean Sea out here. Okay, and Then there's a Sinai Peninsula that goes down like this. And up here is Mount Hermon, and there's a Jordan River that runs down through here, and there would be Jerusalem. Okay, so Mount Sinai is down here. They'd crossed over the Red Sea and made their way down to Mount Sinai. This is where God gave them the law, the Ten Commandments, and God told them how to build the tabernacle. It's an interesting thing, and I got to confess, I have never been to it, and I really want to go bad. When we go to Israel, we go down about this far right here. We go down to a place called Masada, where the Hebrews stood out in the 60s after Jesus' time, and they fought against the Romans coming in to take over Israel permanently. And this is where they held out up on this mountain. And if you've never seen, there's a movie starring, it was an ABC miniseries that came out, oh Lord, a long time ago, probably in the 80s. But you can watch it on Netflix, or you can get a DVD and watch it. It's just simply called Masada. And if you don't know much about it, you ought to get a copy of that and watch it. It makes an impact on you that you won't soon forget. This is where the Maccabees and the people who were revolting against the Roman Empire, they went and they hid out on this mountain. And it's for real out there in the desert. They got this mountain. I keep wanting to walk around. I keep forgetting that I'm online. It's a mountain with a plateau up on top of it. And they had everything they needed up there to survive. Incidentally, I like to brag on this so my wife can fuss at me about it. I have climbed Masada. When I was young, I did it quite often. The last time I did it, I wasn't so young. And I went up with a guy from Crosswater, and we walked up it together. And I'm going to tell you, I left a whole lot of me on that trail going up the mountains. I did. And when I got up there, I looked like I'd been baptized in the River Jordan that day. But anyway, you go up there, and they had built an incredible place. Herod had built a palace up there out in the desert that was one of his palaces that he could flee to in case he was afraid he was going to be undertaken. And it is hard to believe that in 60-something AD, anything that fancy and nice had been built. I mean, they had tiled floors and spas, and they even had air conditioning. They had it was built on the end of the mountain where it would catch the air coming in off the desert and blow it through the tunnels, and could blow it over hot rocks and blow it over cooling that would cool off his place. And then everybody else lived out on the place. But the ruins are still there. Anyway, the Jews held out up there forever. And the Romans finally, after holding it siege, when you're up on top, you can look down and still see the remnants of the walls that the Romans had built, their little fortresses down at the bottom. And how they finally went in, they built a ramp up on this side of it, and they went up that ramp and used battering rams to break through the walls. And that wouldn't have worked because the Jews were throwing rocks and stuff down, big boulders, and killing the workers and doing it. But the Romans started using Hebrews to do that. And so for the people to throw it down, they were killing their own people. So they quit. So finally, the Romans are going to break through and go in. And it's an incredible story that you can see on this video. They made a pact the night before. They knew that the Romans were coming in the next day and that everybody would be killed, mutilated, raped, made slaves. And so they made a pact to commit mass suicide. So they drew lots, and like you would the father would kill the members of his family, and then by lots they would kill each other until the last one that died, he would take his life by suicide. Eleazar was the leader, and his speech is still recorded. There was one person who made the way, and so the speech is recorded and in writing, and it's nothing like getting up there and reading that speech off of the handout to everybody and know what that took place. You go into the room where they actually drew the lots, and that's right, Harry, you're nodding your head. I remember you've been in that room with us. And they made this pact to commit themselves. Matter of fact, not last time, but the time before last when I was there, it was I saw something I'd never seen. There was a Hebrew scribe today that had taken over one of those abandoned rooms and had gone in there, and he's actually a scribe, and he was making copies of the Old Testament, the Torah in Hebrew, like they did back before printing presses were done. They didn't copy it word for word. They copied it letter for letter, dot for dot. And me and the guy that I'm going to Africa with, we stood there and watched him do that. He was kind enough to get up and take some photographs with us because it was like seeing history come alive to see them do that and see the scrolls that were made. But anyway, they came up and they captured that. But the reason I even got off chasing that rabbit is right over here past Masada. If you come out here today, they have built a new replica of the tabernacle. And I have not been to it yet because it's a little out of the way and you almost have to give up a day somewhere else to go down there and see it. But it's a life-size replica. It would be exactly what the Hebrews would have been getting. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through the book of Numbers, okay? So they were worshiping in the tabernacle. So then they leave Sinai and they go up to a place called Kadesh Barnea. Kadesh Barnea. Say that with me. Kadesh Barnea. Say it one more time. Kadesh Barnea. Okay? So they come up to this place called Kadesh Barnea. And it's over here just on this side of the Jordan River. And they could come up there and it's on the mountain. And from there, you can see pretty much, you can see the whole country. You can see out to the sea. You can see down to the desert. I've been up there. Matter of fact, in one of the old books, I have a picture. There's a sign up there that has the arrows pointing off like that, showing it. And so if it's a clear day, you can see in all directions. So Moses and the Israelites get up there, and now remember, now they're ready to go into the promised land. They have left Egypt. They've gone down to Sinai. They got in the law. They've got the tabernacle, and they make their way up to Kadesh Barnea. And they view the promised land from there. And then Moses, he must have had a little bit of Baptist in his background. I don't know, because he did what Baptist preachers do. He got him a committee. You know, my favorite poem my pastor taught me years ago was, Mary had a little lamb, would have grown to be a sheep, but joined a local church and died from lack of sleep, going to committees. So anyway, he sent 12 spies out. And the book of Numbers tells in detail. Matter of fact, I read it again this afternoon. If you read through the book of Numbers, it talks about the names of the people, one from each tribe. And they sent them out to investigate the land. Now, watch this. They didn't go to see if they could do it. They went to see how they could do it and what was going to be involved in doing it. But when they came back, 10 of the 12 said, boy, Moses, you were right. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. It was vegetation and agriculture and just grapes. And I mean, it was just a beautiful place in the Middle East. And they said, it is beautiful. And you were right. You didn't exaggerate. It is wonderful. He said, but there's a problem. There are giants in the land. Those people are humongous, and they have weapons made of iron and steel, which obviously the Jews didn't have anything like that. You know, they would basically have swords or spears or arrows and stuff. And they said, there is no way that we can go in and conquer this land and conquer these people. And but there were two of the spies who said, they're right. It's beautiful and the people are big and it's going to be hard. But if the Lord is for us, we can do it. Let's go. And you remember their names. They were Joshua and Caleb. Say their names with me. Joshua and Caleb. I named my grandson Joshua, or I didn't name him, his mother did, but I suggested to her that she name him Joshua because it's just such a great character in the Bible. And it's the Hebrew word Yeshua, which is our word that we get Jesus from. And the word means God's salvation. So Joshua had been like the intern or the assistant to Moses while he was traveling and leading the people through the desert. So he and Caleb came back and they said, we can do it. We'll follow us. But what do most churches do? They follow the majority rule. By the way, that's not in the Bible. You know, I mean, it's in democracy. It's in American politics. That's why we have a government shutdown. Anyway, if somebody's watching this later online, we just dated when we were recording this, okay? But he went along with the 10. I like to say when they came back from their trip, they had two reports, a majority report and a minority report. And they listened to the majority report and they chose not to go in. They chose not to believe and trust in God. Even though Joshua and Caleb said, God's with us, we can do it. Okay? And so because of their disobedience, God is going to turn them around from Kadesh Barnea, send them back into the desert, and they're going to sojourn, wander in the desert for 40 years. That's where we come up with our word, key word for numbers, wandering in the wilderness. That's what they were doing. By the way, as I was reading through the book of Numbers again this afternoon, I was reminded of why they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Because it was symbolic of the people who disobeyed and didn't trust in God. And so they turned around and wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. They made that fateful decision at Kadesh Barnea. And when they got ready to go back into the promised land, guess what? No adult that was alive at the time that they chose not to go in got to go into the promised land. They waited till a whole generation, that's 40 years. They waited till a whole generation had died before they went into the promised land. Only 2 adult men who were alive at the time they decided not to go in were alive when they went into the promised land. Want to take a wild guess who they were? Joshua and Caleb. Okay? So I read this today and I can't even remember it and remind it today. Tell me the name of the 10 who didn't believe and didn't trust God that formed up the majority report. You don't know them. I read them, but I can't remember. You know, there's a great lesson there. You know, nobody remembers the people that said we can't, but we remember the people that said we can. When I pastored in Mobile, Alabama, we did it's real similar to what we did at Crosswater. We were in a church in Mobile. It was in a little bedroom community outside of Mobile called Chickasaw, named after one of the Indian tribes. So it was at the First Church of Chickasaw, Alabama. Well, at one time back in the 60s, it was a great church. There was a wonderful pastored there for years and years and years, and it was a great church. But then it started dying. Just the population, the area changed so much. You may have heard of the term white flight. It originated from there because in between the city of Mobile and Chickasaw was a city called Pritchard, and it hit a long time ago. It used to be a nice sized city, but it had been overtaken, and now it was pretty much poverty stricken and was like 95% African American, and this was what we called L.A., Lower Alabama. And there was a lot of prejudice there, especially in the 70s and 80s and 90s and stuff. And so what had happened is some of the African Americans had started moving a little bit into Chickasaw. And so they called it white flight because everybody was taking off and leaving it because, oh, terrible things. The blacks were moving into town. I'll tell you how bad it was. Listen, McDonald's moved out of town. I used to tell them, listen, can God's Spirit be anywhere that a McDonald's can't survive? It took on wheels and moved to the next community up above it. And so the area was changing. So the church, the Chickasaw church, really began to decline. And so by the time I got there, we had on a high attendance day, we had 120 folks. The Sunday that I preached in view of a call to become their pastor. We had a big youth rally that day because I wanted to get all the young people together. And so they had 12, and that was counting the youth workers. And we got in there, but I went ahead and went and pastored that church. And we ended up relocating. We moved on the corner of the interstate. We only relocated 5 miles. But you would have thought I was moving that church to Africa. I mean, people, man, they came out of the woodwork to fight against us moving. They recently requested me to write a booklet about that relocation because, it was something to live through. I'm telling you, I remember going up there, and we'll talk about this maybe a little when we get to Joshua, but I saw a corner of land on the interstate up there, and that's all it was. The corner of the land was nothing but trees and forest, but I knew it was a pivotal key intersection for North Mobile, and I went up there and I looked at it, and I got out and I walked through the woods. Because I had read that morning in my quiet time, I'd read Joshua chapter 1, where Joshua prayed and God told Joshua, he said, every place you put the sole of your foot, I'm giving you that land. So I claimed that promise and I went up there to those woods and I started walking around. Everywhere I went and I was going, God, I'm going to claim this property. Everywhere I put the sole of my foot. I wish I'd have walked further. But anyway, I walked. We got tons of acres. And we were going to buy that. So I came back and I called a friend of mine that worked for the power company. And I said, I want you to find out who owns that land because I don't even know who owns that land. I said, do you find out who owns that land? He said, how come? I said, can I swear you to secrecy? He said, yes, sir. I said, we're going to buy that land. And I told him what we was up to. He said, you're crazy, Pastor. No, he was actually very supportive. So he got me the name. It was these 2 brothers. They owned that land. It was the key property in all of North Mobile County. So I walked around and I called those 2 men. I'll never forget. They came to my office. And I sat there and I talked to them. I can still see them sitting there in those 2 chairs. And I was sitting there talking to them. And I told them, I said, I want to see about buying that land. Our church does. I said, I have a vision and a desire. We want to buy that land and relocate our church up there. And he said, well, Pastor, that sounds great, but I can't sell you that land. I said, how come? He said, well, we're going to sell that land to Walmart. And he said, matter of fact, we're already in negotiation and we already have a handshake agreement. We're going to sell it to Walmart. And I said, no, you can't do that. He said, yes, sir, we can. We got the backing of the mayors of the cities and everybody, because they count those tax dollars coming in and the revenue, and they need them. And so we're selling that land to Walmart. And I said, well, I said, okay. I said, but I want you to know this: when you leave here, I'm going to pray every day. Every day, I'm going to pray. I told him about Joshua 1. I said, I've walked all over that property and I've claimed it in the name of the Lord for being our Lord, the Lord's property. And so a whole month went by and I got a phone call from those two brothers. And they said, we'd like to meet with you tomorrow in your office. I said, okay. So they came back in, they sat down, and I'll never forget, these are the first words he said. He said, Pastor, would you please stop praying? I said, why? He said, we had a done deal. They have called and they have backed out on the deal. They're not going to buy this property. Are you still interested in buying it? I said, yes, sir. Where's papers? And so we ended up buying that property. And, but buddy, that was just the beginning of it. There was I told you we had 120 people coming to that church, and we were landlocked. All we had was 120 parking spaces. And so, I had some folks in our church say, well, that's good. We got 120 people, got 120 parking spaces. Well, we started growing, and then we'd gotten up to 600 people. And you couldn't park 600 people and all those cars in that place. We were parking blocks away and walking back to the church to have room. And so we laid the vision out before our people that we needed to buy this property and to move. And I'm telling you, I've never faced such opposition in my life. I mean, the deacons, they were our committee of 12, and but they were good, godly men, and they voted, to do it. So we took it to the church to vote, and boy, howdy doody! The Sunday that we were set to vote, we had this gigantic attendance. This was a church that was 40, 50 years old. There are people that had been members of that church for 40 and 50 years, had moved off. I got it on record. I got this record. I'm not making this up. They'd moved off to Michigan, Ohio, whatever. Their kids had them fly in and come to church so they could vote that day. We did it by ballot, and they checked and they said, my membership's still here. We haven't been here in 20 years, but our membership is still at this church. And so they voted against it. So I'll never forget that day. We voted by secret ballot, gave it to the deacons going to back to count while I preached. I was preaching and my mind was on that vote, but I was still up there preaching. And when I got through preaching, they handed me a slip of paper and they said, the vote to relocate had passed by 67%. So everybody thought, well, we'll never move if they only got 67%. I tell that to my preacher friends and they go, ain't no way you moved on 67%. So I looked and I said, well, it passed by 67%. So the motion is passed. We will be relocating. And we relocated on 67%. Of course, of that 33% that voted against it, the FBI couldn't find some of them after they left. But the Mobile Press Register was there that day to cover the vote. I woke up the next morning and on the front page of the Mobile Press Register was a picture of me sitting behind my desk, and the headline across on the headline, the front top headline of Mobile Press Registration said, Millwood refuses to give in. Boy, that'll bless you on Monday morning. But then on Sunday morning that same day, the newspaper, the television station, the pastor that had been there several years before me, there was somebody in between us, he had a 5-minute devotion on that TV station at 6 in the morning for 22 years. It was the longest running show. It even beat Gunsmoke back at the time. And so they were very curious. So they had a live TV crew showed up for the vote. And when the service was over with, the guy was going with a TV camera. And let me just tell you, if the TV crew shows up, they're going to find the one guy that you don't want them to find. So not only did I see me on the front page of the newspaper, but I turned on TV that night, and I won't call his name. Somebody might be listening or not. But he had a high squeaky voice. He talked like that. They caught him coming out the door, and they said, "What do you think?" I still can hear him. He was sitting there going, "They sold my church down the river. They just sold my church down the river." So we voted to move, and we moved out there, and we built that church. It became, at the time, the 62nd fastest growing church in the United States of any denomination. In the years that I was there, we had 65 students who surrendered to the ministry and went off to seminary and were trained to be pastors, staff members, church leaders. And many of them are still going today, serving and teaching and preaching. All of that because we had the faith to step out and to trust God. Now, look, I didn't just tell you that story to chase rabbits. I tell you that story to make a point. These Hebrews came to Kadesh Barnea, and they had a pivotal decision to make. And because they refused to trust God and they gave in to doubts and fears, they missed out on the will of God. And a whole generation suffered because of their lack of faith and trust in God. Think about that. One whole generation wandered in the wilderness for 40 years because their forefathers didn't trust and believe in God. I believe in everybody's life, and I'm absolutely certain that in every church's life, it comes to a point where we have to make a decision. We're going to trust God and follow God, or we're going to give in to fears and doubts. I thought it was funny. You know, I got out of the ministry for a little while, and then God drugged me back into it, and I went to a church in Ponte Vedra called New Beginnings, and they'd already began to look at some property at the front of Nocatee, so we made a deal and we got that land in Nocatee. So I believe I just keep doing the same thing. I read Joshua 1 and I went down there walking across that land. This time I had to step over snakes and walking through all that, and I claimed it for the Lord, and I never will forget, we dedicated that land to the Lord. And we had some tough times doing that, but we got out there and we built a couple of buildings. And I remember when we built the last building we built, 18 years we built all those buildings, and we didn't owe a dime. Then we got ready to build the last building. It's going to be huge. It's going to be about a $10 million job. So we were going to ask our people, let's temporarily borrow the money, and we'll pay it off of the pledges that people make over the next 3 to 6 years. And we'll be debt free in 6 years. And so we got in there, and I'm going to tell you, we're too close for me to say anything too much, but we had people sitting in there that looked me in the eye and said, "Ain't no way, Pastor, we cannot do this. This would be wrong. We can't build that building to satisfy your ego." Said, you just want to sit out there and let people, we just write checks, blank checks, and just let you fill them in and just not worry about it. And I said, well, listen, I believe with all my heart, God's blessed. We're running 3 services in the building we're at, and we've even started, thinking Saturday nights or Thursday nights, we got to do something. And so this is for the future and the generations. And so we stepped out. We finally got somebody that would loan us the property, and we built that building. And I remember the day we walked into it, one of those people who said all that to me came up to me as I was walking in the door and looked at me and said, "Well, Pastor, I see you got your building." And I said, "Well, thank you." I said, "But I want you to know this is not my building. This is the Lord's building. He wanted it." I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot, looking at it and praying, and I could see in my mind's eye, it wasn't like some I didn't see a vision, but I had a vision in my heart. I could see people pulling their cars up, getting out of their cars, and walking in, holding their kids' hands, going into the house of the Lord to vote, to worship. And we built that building, and God blessed it, and it's still there to this day. And you know what? When I retired, we were right on track to have had that thing paid off in that 6-year period of time. And we were right on track and had plenty of money in the bank to pay the rest of it. Now, what's there today and what they are today, I've been gone, so I don't keep up. But God built that, and it's for His glory. So here's what I want to tell you. And listen, when I teach the book of Numbers in Africa, and you have to forgive me because I get into the mode that I get in Africa, because I'm looking at these young preachers, and I tell them, I say, now look, guys, you signed up to pastor and to lead your people, but I'm going to tell you, it's not all going to be roses, guys. And I said, when you start trying to lead God's people, there are going to be people who stand around and tell you, you can't do this, you can't do that. And they'll give you all the reasons why. And they'll fight against you. And they'll cause all kind of problems. And you ought to hear them, boy. Listen, because they don't sit there and nod. They don't sit there. They go, yeah, yeah. And I'm telling you, they were going wild and just going, that's right, that's right. So I'm going, well, it didn't take them long to find out. And I said, you're going to have to decide, are you going to trust God and obey God, or are you going to listen to those that tell you what God can't do? And I said, look here. I said, I've retired and I'm spending the latter years of my life coming to Africa, not as a missionary trying to reach one group of people in one village or one community or one town. I've come over here to train church leaders and the pastors, because we've got 200, 400 of you pastors sitting in the stream. That's 200, 400 churches that you're building here in Zambia or Zimbabwe or Kenya or whatever country we're in. I said, look, you're leaving footprints all over this country, and you're going to have to decide, are you going to trust God and believe in God? And I said, you've got generations at stake with the decisions you're going to make. And you're going to have the faith and the courage to believe God and to trust God or not. And I've tried to encourage those pastors to lead your people. Incidentally, when the Jews came back from the promised land back to give their report, they came back carrying a piece of wood and hanging from it. They had two guys carrying a pole, and hanging from it were clusters of grapes and fruits that they brought from Israel. Well, when I go to Israel every year, I used to buy wooden statues made out of olive wood out of the Garden of Eden. I'm the Garden of Eden, out of the Garden of Gethsemane. And I never will forget when we were relocating, I bought a statue made out of olive wood that was Joshua and Caleb carrying that pole and those clusters of grapes. I still have it. And we entitled our campaign that year to raise money for it. We entitled it Possess the Land, because that's what we come out here to do, is possess the land. Now, I'm chasing that rabbit enough that I want to apply this to you guys. There comes a point in every one of our lives when we have to make a decision if we're going to trust God or not trust God. And it can come down to whatever reason. Do I trust God enough to tithe, to give to the Lord? Am I going to do it? Am I going to believe it? You know what I found out? God doesn't abandon people who keeps His promises. Whatever you got to trust God for, you got to be willing to possess that land that God has in front of you. And you got to believe that God is giving you the opportunity to possess the land that He's put in front of you, and to have courage and faith to step out and trust that. My ministry to Africa, I will tell you, it's all self-funded. And I sure don't have it to do it, but we have people who, and many of you do, who sacrificially donate over a regular period of time to Jack Millwood Ministry. And that's how we're able to go over there and train those pastors and to help build those churches. That's a part of trusting God, whatever it is. It has to be with our families. We have to trust God with our families. Are we going to raise them right? Or here's the other key word for numbers. I don't want to mess you up. The key ing word for numbers is wondering. But here's another word it could be. It could be murmuring. I like the word murmuring. Do you like that word? It just, to me, it sounds sort of like what's happening. Murmur, 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 murmur. In every church, in every place, there's always a group of people murmuring, complaining. And I was rereading the book of Numbers today, and I'm just amazed at how much murmuring and complaining going on by the people of God while they were out there wandering in the wilderness. I mean, they were just every day complaining and murmuring. Look, God let them wear shoes. The Bible says it didn't wear out for 40 years. My wife got shoes that don't last 40 minutes. For 40 years, I mean, their clothing, and God fed them every day with manna from heaven. I mean, God provided them food every day out there. But you know what they did? Murmuring, murmuring, murmuring. And you know who they murmured to? Moses, murmuring, murmuring, murmuring. And they said to him, you have brought us out from Egypt. And I was reading it today. It said, they actually used the same phrase, Rick. They said, you took us from a land that was flowing with milk and honey. Last time I remember reading Egypt, they were over there in slavery making making brick and mud pies and all that kind of stuff. Now they were calling that a land flowing milk and honey. And they said, we're tired of eating the same thing every day. We want some meat. Now, they had some meat because they did have some livestock. But if they had been butchering them off every day, they wouldn't have had milk. They wouldn't have had all kinds of things. So they were eating the manna that God was providing them every day. So they complained enough that God gave them meat for 1 month. So that they, but then they complained when the month was over that they didn't have any more and they couldn't do it. So part of this is the reason why they got down there and they built that golden calf. And they were just offering sacrifices to anything that they thought would give them what they needed. They're just murmuring and complaining. I can tell you, we can do us a little field trip Sunday. You pick the church. I don't care what church it is. I don't care what denomination it is. You pick a church, and we can drive up and sit in the parking lot in our car. And either right before church or right after church, you'll be able to spot them. They'll be somewhere around the parking lot, somewhere on the property. It'll be 4, 5, or 6. You'll see them over there just murmuring. We used to say, the biggest argument at church on Sundays would be people getting in the parking lot fussing about where they're going to go eat lunch on Sunday, But the truth is, they get out there and they're having the preacher for lunch. What do you think about what he said? Blah, 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 blah. What do you think about what the pastor's wanting us to do? Now, as I was thinking about tonight, reading through the book of Numbers again. Now, I'm gonna be nice while I do this, okay? Y'all see me smiling? You see me smiling? I ain't been smiling. Let me quote you something out of the New Testament. The Bible says this. Do all things without murmuring or complaining or arguing. Now, folks, I got to tell you, some of us God-fearing, Jesus-loving people do a whole lot of complaining. I've had a good friend of mine for many, many, many years. His name's David Ring. I had David come in at Crosswater and speak back in the old building one time long ago. David was born with cerebral palsy. He beats all I've ever seen. He's the craziest human being I ever met. David, he walks like this and he thought like this. I ain't making fun of him. He does this. He thought like this and walked like this. He preaches a sermon. His sermons generally last for an hour. And I said, David, somebody said something about you preaching on. He said, Pastor Jack, it takes me an hour to say what you say in 20 minutes. I said, okay, I get it. But he has his sermon. He actually back in the day put it on an album and then put it on CD and on the internet. You probably Google it and listen to it on YouTube or somewhere. It's David Ring. But the title of the sermon was called Quit Your Belly Aching. And he would get up there and speak and he'd say, I got the cerebral palsy. What's your problem? Quit your belly aching. Now, I'm going to tell you, that's a strong sermon. And I got to confess, I don't have this down. I belly ache. I complain. Be quiet, Ann. Don't need you to say a word. Yeah, I thought I'd just beat her at the pass. But you know what I've discovered? You know what, folks? You can always find somebody that's got it worse than you do. You can always find somebody that's got it worse than you do. When I had my sickness and I was going down to Brooks Rehab and I couldn't hardly stand, couldn't hardly walk, and they would hook me up to these straps and have me trying to walk and do. And man, they was pushing me and it was struggling. And I'd been down there about a whole month and it just made some steps. But I look around that room and there were people who've been coming 2 years that could just barely raise their arm. And I thought to myself, quit your belly aching. We had a boy in our church in Mobile that was gone by the time most of y'all got in there. He used to sing in our church, but he left a bull ride. And he got thrown off of a bull once and it snapped his spine. And as I got out of the hospital, we went down and saw him over at Brooks Rehab. He is paralyzed from the waist down. And from the neck down. Yeah, from the waist down. From the neck down. I saying waist and pointing at my neck. It's because my neck's getting to be the size of my waist, I guess. But I went in there to see him, and he had been, after all this time, he could move a finger and stuff like that. And I said to him when I left, I said, remind me of him when I start belly aching. But the truth is, listen, guys, come here, I'm being honest. I ain't just talking about huge stuff like that. The easiest thing to do on this planet is to complain. It's the easiest thing to do on the planet is to complain. It's too hot. It's too cold. Little bit of pressure comes in. I've told this illustration so long, I'm embarrassed to tell it, but do you know what you get when you squeeze a tube of toothpaste? The answer is not toothpaste. When you squeeze a tube of toothpaste, you know what comes out? Whatever was inside that tube is what comes out. So when you get squeezed in life, you know what comes out? Whatever was inside you. If you get squeezed and Jesus comes out, then you're filled with Jesus. If you get squeezed and 4-letter words come out and complaining comes out, guess what? That's what was in there. I no longer call it a slip of the tongue. It's a slip of the heart. And I got to tell you, we do. We complain about our husbands. We complain about our wives. We complain about our kids. We complain about our jobs. And I pastored, 50-something years I spent pastoring. And I got to tell you, some of the most complaining people I've ever met in my life are godly Christian people who are church members. And I'm not just talking about complaining about church. They just complain about life. And I used to at church, there's one question I learned through the years of pastoring. I never like to ask church members. I never like to say, how you doing? Because I was afraid they'd tell me.
Right.
And I'd be there for the next hour. And, you know, I remember one time I said to my pastor, you know, who original concept of jogging through the Bible, Dr. Fred Larry, he asked one day, he said, how you doing? I said, pretty good under the circumstances. And he was my pastor, so, you know, he didn't give me a slack. He looked at me and said, Jack, as a Christian, you're not supposed to live under the circumstances. You're to live above the circumstances, you know. And so many of the times we live under the circumstances. So when you read through the book of Numbers, you're going to read a lot of murmuring and complaining. They rebelled against Moses. Even his own brother and sister rebelled against him. The leaders of the people rebelled against him, complained against him. They didn't have water. They didn't have meat. They just complained. And God got so frustrated. At one point, God said to Moses, just get out of the way. I'll wipe them down and we'll start a whole new people through you. And Moses got down on his face on the ground and pleaded with God not to destroy the people. I've often thought, I don't know, if I'd been Moses, I'd been saying, let me get out of the way, God. Go ahead. Step out. Have yourself, Lord. Yeah, there's been several times I've thought, it'd be all right, me, Lord. Go ahead. Try them. You slice them, dice them, I'll fry them, you know. But not Moses. What a great, you know, I read this again in the Bible in the Exodus day. It said Moses was the most humble man on the earth. You know, that's actually what Exodus said. Most humble, led 3 million people. But the lawgiver, considered one of the greatest leaders in the history of humankind, in and out of religion. But the Bible says the most humble man that ever lived. I mean, and he had to put up with all of those people complaining and arguing and fussing. You know, I'm chasing. Look here. Here's some great things about wandering wilderness. God's promises. Murmuring. Joshua and Caleb. His successor, Joshua. God's promise. Let me tell you this. And I want to say something about these promises. Even with all of that, God kept his promises to his people. Look, he brought them to Kadesh Barnea, ready to take them across. They didn't go because they didn't believe him. They turned around and wandered in the desert for 40 years. But God kept his promises. Remember, by the day there was a pillar of cloud that they could follow. At night, they could follow the pillar of fire. One day, for a couple of years, I really wasn't in the will of God. I wasn't doing what God wanted me to do. And I was riding around in my car one day. I remember it was down in Vero Beach, Florida. I remember driving across that little bridge, going across that creek. And I was just talking to God. And I was going, God, whatever you do, you know, I deserve it. You know, I can understand if you don't love me, if you don't care for me, you don't do nothing. And it's like one of the clearest times in my life I ever remember God really speaking to my heart. God reminded me, when the children of Israel were in the wilderness, why were they in the wilderness? Why were they in the wilderness? Because of disobedience. Deuteronomy chapter 8 says that God led them through the wilderness during their disobedience to test them, to prove them, to test what was in their heart. And God reminded me, I didn't abandon my people because they abandoned me. I stayed with them even when they didn't stay with me. I fed them, I clothed them, and I guided them even while they were in the wilderness. Now, I don't know about you, but boy, that's encouraging to me. Because now listen to this. Now, it's not in your book. You ought to write this down. You ought to remember this. God's promises are not based on my performance. They're based on his promise. God keeps his word even when I don't keep mine. God is faithful. That's one of the great promises of the book of Numbers, that God keeps his promises to us, no matter where we are and no matter what we do. Okay? And these are the great people in the 5 outstanding characters in the book of Numbers. Obviously, Moses, his brother Aaron, who became the high priest, his sister Miriam, and then Joshua and Caleb, the 2 spies. And then you know that Joshua is going to become the leader of Israel when Moses steps aside. Now I'll warn you, I'm so excited. Somebody actually listened to what I said last week. You went home and you read the book of Leviticus. Now go home and read the book of Numbers. Okay, but I will tell you, it's not the easiest reading in the world because I just reread it today. Okay, and it gets tough because it says, these are the names of the 12. These are the names of the 12's adult sons. These are the names of everybody aged 20 and over. I mean, they just list after list after list, and you can't pronounce a third of the names anyway. I mean, you know, you're going through that and going, oh boy, this is my daily Bible reading. But you go through that. But anyway, they actually, in case you wonder, they actually count them up. You know, this is Judah, and these are the adult men over 20 years of age, and it tells you how many numbers each one of the sons, and then adds it up. Says this is the family of Judah, how many men? And so when you add them all up, there are 603,550 men over the age of 20, and that doesn't count the children. It doesn't count anybody under 20. It doesn't count the women, and it doesn't count the whole tribe of Levi. Now later they count the Levites, and you get their number. When you do take time to do all that math, thank God for computers now, it adds up to more than 3 million. And so don't let people tell you that there was this little bitty crowd that left. I mean, while they were living in the land of Goshen in Egypt, man, they multiplied, and God bless them. So when they went out, there was about 3 million of them. I thought, how do you pastor 3 million people in the desert that don't like what they're eating and don't like what they're drinking? Man, I used to think about that, and I said, man, I got an easy job. But that's what they were doing, wondering about that. And then, you know, then Moses, this is one of the things that I had the hardest problem understanding when I was young. Moses does all of that, and then God says to him, but you don't get to go into the promised land. I remember talking to God. I was going, now, God, I know that's the Bible, and I know you're God, but that just doesn't seem right to me. That he delivered them. He did all of that, put up with all that, gets up there, is ready to lead them, and then they don't go, and you're going to let the next generation go, but you're not going to let him go. I go, God, that is not fair. I don't understand that. Then I got thinking about it. You know what it says? It says that Moses died up on Mount Nebo. And then it says God buried him. Now, I don't know about you, but that's pretty good. Paul buried good to bring you home to the promised land. And you know what? I realized, and I thought about this today, riding in my car for just a little bit. I thought again today. I said, things have a way of working out. You know, when things happen, you don't know why they happen. You wonder, why do people rebel against Moses? And what happens to Moses? God keeps his word and honors Moses and brought him on with Moses. you know, and you can go to Israel, and I've seen the sites of tombs and graves of all biblical heroes. I've seen traditional sites of biblical heroes. Nobody's ever seen the traditional site of Moses' grave because God buried him. God took him home to be with him. And it reminds me again of what I said before. God keeps his promises. I mean, to all of us, no matter what. And sometimes God's biggest blessings are disguised through some of our biggest problems. Ain't that true? I mean, I think about what God, I'm, don't tell him that. I'm 70 years old. My health is not wonderful, as y'all saw. But who would have thought at 70 years of age, with not the greatest health in the world, that I would have the opportunity to train thousands of pastors in Africa that'll be building churches and reaching people for generations long after I'm gone to the promised land to be with the Lord. And I thought, that would have never happened if God hadn't kept his promises. And he's faithful to keep his promises. So I just want to encourage you tonight. I thank y'all for coming. I thank y'all for listening online. So I want to finish tonight with this word of encouragement, okay? Whatever you're going through, I'm sure you can find a reason to complain. I'm sure you can. And you could justify it. I guarantee you could justify it. Sometimes I'm complaining to her and she goes, why are you complaining? Because I go, because it's real. You know, but look, in the midst of you complaining, remember that God works all things together for the good of those who are complaining, who know the Lord, for his purposes. And what may seem like your biggest problem may be God's biggest blessing that comes your way. And you just cherish it. Let's pray. Lord, forgive us for being like the Hebrews in the desert. After we have seen you deliver us, after we have seen you part the Red Seas of our life, after you've built us tabernacles in the wilderness and provided manna from us from heaven, forgive us for complaining when things don't work out the way we think they ought to. Help us to trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust you, Lord, and to obey you. And I pray that we'd all leave this Bible study tonight learning to trust more than we complain. I pray this and I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. I look forward to seeing you back online next week or back here in the room next week. Okay? Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you.
I'm trying to turn that off. Okay.